Armed deputies were ordered into one of the most talked-about seafood restaurants in all of California on a scorching afternoon, and the owner did not run to his children. He ran to his camera. That one decision, captured live and in real time on a stream that was already broadcasting, is the reason this video detonated across the internet within hours, and it is the reason every person who watches it walks away with the same queasy question they cannot quite answer. Before a deputy finished barking a single order, before the first hands went into the air, before anyone inside that building knew whether the threat was real or a rumor, the lens was already pointed straight at the chaos. That is not a throwaway detail. That is the entire story. We have to slow down and name this correctly, because the word has been tossed around so often that it has started to feel harmless. This was not a wellness check, and it was not a noise complaint. This was a full emergency deployment, armed deputies, a hard perimeter, and a room-by-room extraction of every human being inside a restaurant, all triggered by a phone call that may not have come from a real witness at all. Investigators call it swatting, and swatting is not a prank. It is a weaponized lie aimed at bringing a small army to a person's front door. So before anyone laughs at grown deputies marshalling outside a crab boil, understand the stakes. If that false report had been 1 degree more detailed, if the response had been 1 degree slower, and if a single exhausted deputy had misread one sudden movement, this afternoon could have ended in blood. The man at the center of it is a rapper most of the world first met through a song built for strip club speakers. Blueface, born Jonathan Porter, blew up on the back of Thoshiana, a record that climbed the charts, spawned endless remixes, and turned an unorthodox, behind-the-beat delivery into a legitimate style. But the music has never truly been the reason millions keep watching. The reason is the life around the music, the live streams, the family feuds, the rotating roster of relationships, the custody battles, the leaked arguments, and a relationship with fame that has always felt closer to a long public argument than to a career. Blueface is not simply a rapper in the news. He is a reality show that happens to release songs, and on this particular day, the reality show and the restaurant finally collided in a way nobody scripted. Here is the scene, because the setting matters more than most people want to admit. A seafood spot does not become a target by accident. It becomes a target because it is a symbol, and a symbol is exactly what this restaurant has become. Walls of crab, bags of seasoning, neon, music, and a sign that ties the whole establishment to a man whose public life is a magnet for attention. On this afternoon, the doors were open, the customers were seated, and the staff were working the floor as they always do. Then the deputies arrived. Not one car, not two, but a response that told everybody in the lot that a dispatcher had taken the report seriously enough to roll heavy. The cameras caught the moment the situation shifted from an ordinary lunch rush to a scene out of a procedural drama, and it is at exactly this point that the story splits into 2 completely different movies, the one the authorities were trying to prevent, and the one that was already being filmed. The extraction was methodical. One by one, the deputies pulled people out, and every single frame of it was being recorded for an audience watching in real time. Staff members came out with their hands raised. Customers who had simply shown up to eat were escorted into the heat. The energy swung wildly between terrifying and absurd, because standing in the middle of a genuine police response was a man who seemed less concerned with the safety of the moment than with whether the shot was framed correctly. That is the detail people cannot stop talking about. Before checking on his loved ones, before making sure his own children were accounted for, Blueface reportedly reached for the camera and set up the live stream. Some of the people around him were unleashing every curse word in the book at the deputies, and frankly, who could blame them? This was an invasion, a disruption, and a humiliation wrapped into one, and it is not the first time this family has been put through it. The claim that brought all of this to the door was as ugly as it was specific. According to what law enforcement relayed on the scene, the caller alleged that Blueface had put his hands on his fiancée, and that shots had been fired. Read that again. That is not a petty complaint about noise. That is a report designed to produce the maximum possible response, an accusation engineered to ensure officers arrived expecting violence and prepared for a gunfight. The deputies on the ground referenced a burner phone, the kind of untraceable number that makes a caller effectively invisible, which tells you the level of planning involved. Whoever made that call wanted to be a ghost, and so far they have gotten exactly what they wanted. Every time a false report like this lands, the entire machine of public safety is forced to take it at face value, because the one time a department treats it as a joke is the one time it turns out to be real. There is no safe way to ignore a claim of domestic violence and gunfire, and the people who exploit that fact are not pranksters. They are abusing the most serious tools the state has. Watching the footage, the detail that hits hardest is not the cursing, and it is not the raised hands. It is the children. A young child was caught up in the middle of the whole thing, and the conversation around it turned genuinely sharp in the comments. People pointed out that a baby had been out in the heat, that the little ones had been pulled into a standoff they did nothing to create, and that the entire scene was the opposite of what a safe family afternoon is supposed to look like. Some viewers called the moment traumatizing for the kids. Others, watching the same exact clip, framed it as easy content, free material handed over by the police department itself. That split in the audience is the real story underneath the story, because it exposes something uncomfortable about how we consume chaos when the people living inside it have built their careers on being watched. The same crowd that says protect the children hits refresh the next breath to see if the stream is still up. Here is where the camera angle genuinely matters. Blueface has spent years building an audience on the promise that his life is watchable, that the camera is always on, that no setback is too ugly to be turned into content. So when the deputies stormed the restaurant, Blueface did the thing he has trained himself to do. He pointed the lens and kept the show moving. People in the room were furious, and reasonably so, but the person whose name was on the building seemed to be running a completely different calculation in his head. Is Blueface a man who does not care about his family, or a man who has become so fluent in the language of attention that the instinct fires before the panic does? You can argue it either way, and the internet has, loudly, on both sides. What you cannot do is pretend the reaction was neutral, because it was arguably the most revealing few seconds of the entire afternoon. Let us talk about the woman at the heart of the allegation, because her name is now tangled into a report that could follow the family for years. The fiancée in question is Jaidyn Alexis, the woman Blueface has described as the future Mrs. Porter, and the person around whom an enormous amount of the current drama already revolves. Their relationship has never been quiet. It is a 9-year story of breakups and reunions, of co-parenting and public arguments, of a proposal broadcast to the world, and a timeline that has always been messier than the fairy tale version they appear to want people to believe. The two of them share children, which is the part that turns every headline from gossip into something heavier. When a swatting call alleges that a man harmed the mother of his children, it is not an attack on a celebrity image. It is a threat aimed at the center of a household, and the fact that the allegation appears, by every available indication, to be false does not make the damage less real. An accusation like that lingers. It plants a seed, haunts search results, and invites speculation that no retraction ever fully scrubs away. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb people. Swatting is almost never about the victim in the way people assume. It is about control. The person who files the false report is not trying to tell the truth. They are trying to deploy the government as a weapon, to point the full weight of armed authority at a human being's front door and then watch. They face no confrontation, and they do not even have to reveal who they are. That is the coward's sophistication, and the burner phone detail confirms it. A burner is designed to be used once and discarded, leaving investigators chasing a number never attached to an identity in any meaningful way. The deputies on the scene all but admitted the frustration. They can respond and secure the scene, but tracing a ghost is close to impossible. That is why the question of who keeps doing this has become its own obsession online, a mystery layered on top of the incident that will not fade until somebody actually answers for it. So who is being pointed at by the people who watch all of this unfold? The theories are predictably all over the map, which makes the saga so sticky. Some viewers insist the call came from somebody connected to Nevaeh Akira, the influencer recently cut from what Blueface himself calls his roster, that infamous rotating cast of women whose comings and goings fuel an entire corner of the internet. The timeline matters. Nevaeh was publicly cast out, and public cast-outs in this orbit have a way of generating public payback. It would be unfair to accuse anyone on a vibe, and the authorities have named nobody, but the speculation did not appear out of thin air. It appeared because this ecosystem runs on feuds, and every feud eventually produces a rumor about who might be spiteful enough to call. Other people look toward the long and complicated history with Chrisean Rock, the former partner whose relationship with Blueface has been a rolling catastrophe for years. Chrisean is a lightning rod, a woman whose every move is dissected by an audience that watched her go from collaborator to adversary so many times the timeline has become lore. She and Blueface share a child, and that child is the subject of endless public argument. So when a false report lands on his restaurant, it is almost automatic for a segment of the audience to glance toward the most volatile relationship in his orbit. But speculation is not evidence, and the difference between the two is the only thing keeping this conversation from collapsing into pure libel. Then there are those who point at Jaidyn herself, and even at Christian, the figure referenced in the chaos of the stream itself. The truth is that nobody outside the investigation knows, and the people loudest about their certainty are usually the ones with the least information. There is one more theory that deserves to be taken seriously precisely because it is so cynical. What if the call was not an enemy attacking the empire, but the empire feeding itself? That is a dark question, not one to level lightly. But it has to be raised because the alternative is pretending public figures never understand how valuable a crisis can be. A false police response filmed live is, from a detached angle, extraordinarily watchable. It is manic, emotional, and arrives with built-in stakes no ordinary stream can manufacture. Some viewers looked at the camera going up before the children were secured and reached a conclusion hard to dismiss. That in this house the footage comes first, because the footage is the business, and the business is the only thing that has ever been fully reliable. If that theory is wrong, what we witnessed was Blueface defaulting to the only instinct he trusts. If it is right, the entire incident was never merely a crime against the family, but a kind of grotesque advertisement. And that is a far heavier accusation to carry. The restaurant itself deserves a separate paragraph, because you cannot understand any of this without understanding what the establishment represents. Blueface has been loudly framing King of Crabs as his move into legitimate business, a seafood joint where the community can roll through, eat well, and maybe catch a glimpse of the man himself. He has bragged about the numbers on stream, rattled off daily revenue figures meant to signal arrival, and talked about the place with a pride that is, in its own way, surprisingly sincere. A restaurant is not a song or a viral moment. It is a physical location with leases, inspections, payroll, and the brutal arithmetic of small business. And the fact that Blueface has attached his name to it means it is now permanently vulnerable in a way a recording never was. Anybody with a grudge knows exactly where Blueface eats, where his money sits, and where his family can be found on a given afternoon. That is the hidden cost of turning your life into a public brand. And this swatting incident was a blunt reminder that the price is not paid in views. It is paid in the real world, on a real street, with real deputies and real guns, and a real child standing in the heat. Let us pause on the child, because the child is the part the algorithm will not let people forget, and the part that should shame everyone involved in manufacturing the chaos. There are reports and clips of a little one being carried, handed off, and near the center of a scene no child should ever have to normalize. Viewers who have followed this family for years note, with grim weariness, that the kids have been exposed to cameras, arguments, and public spectacle since the moment they were born. That is not a parenting hot take. It is the observable reality of a household that lives in the feed. But there is a difference between growing up around a camera and growing up around an armed police response triggered by a lie. One is a burden. The other is a legitimate trauma, and the fact that the stream kept rolling through it is the detail that will age the worst years from now. You can defend the content strategy all you want. Defending the child's presence in it is a much harder argument to make, and most people wisely do not attempt it. Meanwhile, on the ground, the interaction between Blueface and the deputies became a strange, almost surreal negotiation. There were moments of genuine tension, moments where voices rose and hands were ordered up, and moments that tipped into something closer to bitter comedy. Blueface wanted his child brought to him. The deputies, doing their job, maintained the perimeter and worked through the process. He pressed. They pushed back. The whole thing had the texture of two completely different realities trying to talk to each other through a megaphone. At one point Blueface insisted he was pressing charges against whoever made the call, and you could hear in his voice the specific exhaustion of someone who has been through this routine before. The deputies made it plain they were simply confirming the situation and would clear out as soon as they could. There was no victory lap, no dramatic arrest, no confession. Just a grimy bureaucratic unfurling of authority in a building full of seafood and streams, and then a slow release of tension as everyone on scene realized the whole thing had been conjured out of a phone line. What makes swatting uniquely cruel is the asymmetry between the effort required and the harm delivered. The perpetrator spends maybe 90 seconds on a phone call, reciting a script any true crime obsessive could improvise from memory. The result is a convoy of armed strangers arriving where innocent people are eating lunch. The cost to the taxpayer is a figure no one totals on screen, because to total it would be to confront the fact that a single liar just burned the labor of a dozen public servants for nothing. Every deputy outside that restaurant was a deputy not responding to a real emergency somewhere else. Swatting is not victimless mischief. It is a theft of emergency services, a recklessly escalated fraud, and in the worst documented cases across the country it has ended with an innocent person dead at the hands of law enforcement acting on a fabricated report. The people who treat it as a joke are gambling with human life for the sake of attention or revenge. There is a legal dimension most reaction channels blow past at high speed, and it is worth naming. Knowingly making a false report that triggers an emergency response is a crime in every serious jurisdiction, and when that report alleges violence, the potential charges rise from a slap on the wrist to something that can follow a person for life. Prosecutors do not need the caller to be clever, and they do not need a confession. They need the records, the timing, the pattern, and a suspect, and burner phones are not the impenetrable shield that television suggests. These devices still leave a trail. They ping towers, connect to accounts, and are often discarded within reach of a camera or a transaction that ties them back to a buyer. The caller who thinks they have vanished may be quietly accumulating a file, and when that file closes, the laughter stops. Whoever did this is not a mastermind. They are a pending defendant waiting to be brought out of the shadows. For Blueface, the immediate question is simpler and more personal. How does Blueface, a man whose entire brand is built on live, unfiltered access, protect his family when that access becomes a liability? The footage suggests he has not fully figured that out yet. Every stream is a door held open, and every open door is an invitation to people who do not wish him well. The restaurant's location is public. The faces of the children have been public. The rhythm of the household has been public. None of that excuses a false report, but it is context, and context separates a thoughtful viewer from a person who just wants to pick a side and cheer. You can condemn the swatter with absolute conviction and still ask whether the family's relationship with the camera is making them a bigger target. Those two things are not contradictions. They are the whole truth of living on a stage when any stranger with a phone can redirect the state toward your front door. And yet the most uncomfortable observation is the one viewers keep returning to in the comments. That Blueface at the center appeared, on some level, almost comfortable with the absurdity. There is a rhythm to how he handled it, a familiarity suggesting this is far from his first time managing a crisis while the stream runs hot. He did not shut the camera down. He did not retreat to protect his family's privacy. He worked the situation, narrated it, and fed it to an audience eating every second. You can call that resilience, and some supporters do. You can call it desensitization, the slow erosion of the boundary between a family emergency and a content opportunity. Or you can call it what it most likely is. Blueface has spent so long turning pain into product that he no longer remembers how to turn the machine off, even when the thing on the other side of the lens is an armed response and a terrified child. That is not a flattering portrait, but it is an honest one, and honesty is the only thing that keeps this genre from becoming pure cheerleading for whoever happens to be holding the camera. Step back and consider the broader pattern, because treating this as an isolated incident is the mistake that lets the cycle repeat. Celebrity swatting has been escalating for years, a toxic byproduct of an internet that has made addresses discoverable, enemies anonymous, and outrage performative. Rappers, streamers, gamers, and reality stars have all been hit, and the thread is the same. A life public enough to locate, drama loud enough to generate a motive, and an audience engaged enough to make the footage feel like an event. The person behind this latest false report understood all three conditions and chose the target that would maximize spectacle. That is not random malice. That is strategy, and it worked. Because here we are dissecting every frame of a lunch rush that became national content for no better reason than that somebody wanted it that way. Now we arrive where the allegations against Jaidyn Alexis have to be handled with real care, because this is a living woman with children, and the accusation sent to dispatch was serious. To be clear, there is no credible evidence that Blueface laid hands on his fiancée as the report described, and the shape of the afternoon points toward a hoax. The authorities responded, found no victim, found no casualty, and moved on, which is what happens when a fabrication collides with reality. But the rumor is out now, and rumors in this ecosystem do not die. They are kept alive by people who monetize ambiguity. Every future argument between the couple will be refracted through the lie. Every future headline will carry the faint echo of an accusation that was never true. That is the cruelty of swatting that has nothing to do with guns and perimeters. It is the slow corruption of a reputation, seeded in a single call and harvested by an algorithm that does not care whether the claim was real. For Jaidyn specifically, the situation is complicated by the fact that she is already a figure of intense fascination, scrutinized for everything from parenting to business ventures to the question that follows every woman in her position, whether she is standing by her man out of love, loyalty, or a calculation only she understands. The engagement was supposed to settle something, to draw a line under years of chaos and signal that the couple had finally chosen each other for good. But engagements do not erase history, and this household has more history than most. Krazian is still in the picture in ways that cannot be unwound. The roster drama is still fresh, and the internet has a long memory for every word spoken on a stream. So when a swatting call names the fiancé, it lands not on a blank slate, but on a woman whose every move is already overinterpreted. The fair thing to do is exactly what the authorities did. Not assume, not prejudge, and wait for evidence. The internet is allergic to waiting, so the speculation machine is already at its highest setting. There is a version of this story the sensationalists want you to believe, and a version the facts support, and the gap between the two is where all the engagement lives. The sensationalist version has a villain behind every burner phone, a conspiracy in every paused frame, and a family on the verge of collapse. The factual version is more mundane and somehow more troubling. A man with an enormous public footprint was targeted by an untraceable liar. Law enforcement did its job under conditions that were humiliating but necessary, and a family that has already endured years of spectacle absorbed another day of it on camera. No arrest, no victim, no shooter, no closure. Just bills to the taxpayer, trauma to the kids, and a fresh wave of content for a machine that never sleeps. The truth is not satisfying enough for people who want a crime thriller and too ugly for people who want a simple morality tale. It is just the mess, and the mess is the one thing this story has in abundance. Now examine the reaction online with the same forensic attention the pixels deserve, because the audience's split is where the real cultural signal lives. On one side sits genuine sympathy for a family that keeps getting dragged through manufactured emergencies by people they may never identify. On the other sits a hardened cynicism that sees the whole afternoon as another episode in a show the family co-produces, whether they admit it or not. Both readings come from people who watch the same footage, and neither camp is entirely wrong, which is exactly why the comment sections are so venomous. The sympathizers point to the child and ask how anyone could call that entertainment. The cynics point to the camera and ask why the lens was rolling before the kid was secured. The truth, sitting ignored in the middle, is that both happened at once. A real family was genuinely endangered, and Blueface instinctively monetized the danger. Holding both thoughts at once is uncomfortable, so most people choose one and start typing. That is the entire psychology of the reply section, and it is also the algorithm's favorite food. Names get dropped in these spaces with a casualness that would terrify a defamation attorney. Nevaeh, Christian, Jaidyn, Christian. Each name arrives glued to a theory that has the texture of certainty, but the foundation of a rumor, and each is repeated until it starts to feel like a fact. The law requires evidence. The feed requires vibes. The feed moves faster, so the vibes win the sprint even when the law wins the marathon. A responsible observer has to keep saying the unglamorous thing. Nobody has been charged, nobody has been named by investigators, and the caller's identity remains unknown. Everything else, no matter how confidently delivered, is a guess wearing a costume. What would justice actually look like here? Phone records being pulled. Burner devices traced through their signal trail. A suspect identified through the mundane connective tissue of purchases, locations, and accounts. A charge for filing a false report, and if the facts support it, additional charges for whatever the prosecution can establish about intent. A public accounting for the cost of the response, because taxpayers deserve to know what one malicious call did to their emergency budget. And finally, an acknowledgement from every content creator in this space that the spectacle is part of what makes the crime so attractive. That last part will never happen, because the spectacle is the business model, and nobody audits their own revenue stream in public. There is a lesson here for anyone who has dreamed of building a public brand on the ashes of their own privacy. Fame is an asset until it becomes a target, and the two states are separated by nothing but the behavior of strangers you will never meet. The same visibility that sells the streams is the visibility that tells an anonymous enemy exactly where to send a false police response. The same audience that celebrates the brand is the audience that will screen record the crisis before the deputies leave the lot. You cannot have the reach without the exposure, and you cannot have the exposure without the risk. That is not a moral judgment. It is a structural fact of the attention economy, and it is why so many who achieve the fame they chased end up quietly longing for the anonymity they destroyed in the process. And through it all, there is something defiant about the way Blueface kept the stream alive. It was not graceful, and not what most parents would call the right call, but it was consistent. Blueface has built his whole identity on the refusal to look away, on the insistence that even the ugliest, most dangerous moments of his life are on the record. Most people hide their family emergencies. This man broadcasts them. Whether that is courage, compulsion, or commerce will never be settled to everyone's satisfaction. And maybe that unsettled quality is exactly the point. The people who watch him do not tune in for resolution. They tune in for the unbroken feed, for the sense that at any second something unscripted could go wrong. And on this afternoon it did, and the feed was there for every second of it. That is the paradox that makes the story so hard to turn off. The thing that should have stopped the stream is what made it irresistible. A false report that summoned armed deputies to a restaurant full of families was transformed, in real time, into the most compelling broadcast of the day. The tragedy and the content were the same footage. The danger and the entertainment were the same pixels. And for as long as a swatting can function as a ratings event, there will be another swatter, another burner phone, another armed response, and another thread of comments arguing over who is to blame. The only way to stop it is to change the incentives, and the only people who can change them are the ones profiting from them now. That is not a call anyone is likely to accept, but it is the truth this family, and every family living its life in front of a lens, will have to reckon with sooner or later. So where does this leave us? Hours after the last deputy pulled out of the parking lot, and the stream went dark? With more questions than answers, which is the most honest ending for a story built on a lie. Who made the call? Nobody knows. Will they be caught? The investigation continues, and the burner phone meant to guarantee invisibility may turn out to be the very clue that undoes the scheme. Was the response a failure of priorities, a masterclass in crisis content, or simply the reflex of a man who has been watched so long he can no longer conceive of being unwatched? The footage will not answer that on its own. The only certainty is that a restaurant full of innocent people was terrorized for no reason. A child was caught in the crossfire of a hoax. Public money was burned, and the whole thing was uploaded to an audience that could not look away. If that is not a parable for the age we are living in, nothing is. The swatter is still out there, and that should sit with people longer than the jokes do. Somewhere right now there is a person who made a phone call and watched the chaos with whatever satisfaction a phantom feels when the plan works. And that person learned the lesson this saga teaches everyone who commits the same crime. It worked. The response came. The spectacle unfolded. The target was humiliated, and the world watched. Until that lesson is untaught, the incentive structure will keep producing the same result, and the only variable will be the address. Next time the false report might describe a hostage situation, an active shooter, or a weapon a frightened deputy thinks they see in a child's hand. This is not a slippery slope argument. This is the documented history of swatting fatalities, and every veteran officer knows the next hoax is one misread moment from becoming a funeral. For the family at the center of this, the aftermath will be telling. Will the streams continue as before, as if nothing structural was revealed? Almost certainly yes, because the incentives have not changed and the audience has not left. But somewhere beneath the bravado, a more serious conversation has to be happening about what it means to raise children inside a permanent live feed, and whether the price of the empire is being paid in a currency that cannot be streamed back into profit. The audience can speculate all it wants. The only people who can actually have that conversation are behind closed doors, and those doors remain the one place the feed does not reach. As for the people watching from outside, the only responsible posture is a hard one. Watch less, think more, and refuse to mistake the performance of concern for the real thing. It is easy to type "protect the children" and mean it a split second before refreshing the feed. It is easy to condemn the swatter while feeling the guilty thrill of a stream that should not be happening. Easy is the enemy here, and the algorithm is built on easy. The harder move is to recognize that every view is a vote, every share is a subsidy, and every repost of the chaos is, in a small way, payment to the very system that made it inevitable. That does not mean looking away from real injustice. It means refusing to be farmed by it. And that difference is the entire battle. If you made it this far, you already know where you stand, and that is what I want to hear from you. Because in this story, the comment section is the real debate. Did the camera go up first because this family has turned crisis into a reflex? Or was it simply a frightened man doing the only thing he knows under pressure? Is the swatter someone with a personal grudge like the roster fallout suggests, someone from the warped orbit of the older claims? Or is the truth stranger and more calculated than any of the names being thrown around? And here is the uncomfortable one I want you to actually sit with before answering. If this exact scene had happened with no camera running, would any of us even be talking about it right now? Or has the feed itself become the only reason the story exists at all? Drop your answer below, keep it respectful, and do not name anyone a culprit without evidence. Because the last thing this situation needs is another false accusation stacked on top of the false report that started it. A story like this does not end when the stream does. It keeps running in the feeds, mutating in the comments, and pulling in people who missed the live moment and now want the full breakdown. If this is your first time unpacking the King of Crabs swatting, welcome to the part of the timeline where it stops being a clip and starts being a case study in everything wrong and everything fascinating about fame in this era. If you have followed this family for a while, You already know this is not the first time a police response became a broadcast, and it likely will not be the last. The only thing